Hello, I'm Jake Stone,
I'm Jesse Owens.
and we welcome you to another episode of Generally Particular, a production of the London Lyceum. Generally Particular is a show dedicated to discussing and reflecting on the whole Baptist story. We are a show by Baptists, about Baptists, and for Baptists, as well as Anglicans, Methodists, Presbyterians, Lutherans. And yes, we're recording this at the end of the Southern Baptist Convention. So for any Southern Baptists who are looking for comfort during these times of difficulty in the Baptist Zion, we are here for you. I'm a Calvinist Baptist, and Jesse is an Arminian Baptist. In the 17th and 18th centuries, of course, it depends on who you talk to, we would have been called a particular Baptist and a general Baptist, or some people would say a Baptistic Congregationalist and a Baptistic Separatist. So, generally particular sounds a lot more interesting than separatist Congregationalist. I almost sound like Joe Biden there for a minute. And so we pull this together, what we think is a fun show. And the reason I'm talking like this is because it's been an ordeal for me and Jesse just to begin to record this episode today. We've both had to restart our computers. So, demons in the technology. So, today we continue our series, Baptist Bios. And the man that we're going to look at today is who Jesse considers the missing link in Baptist history, the man Benjamin Stinton. So just as Darwin had to try to find the ape to have the missing link in evolution, Benjamin Stinton is Jesse's missing link in searching for Baptist harmony and Catholicity at the beginning of the 18th century.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if he's quite the
Can
missing.
you top off that introduction?
That was pretty. That was pretty solid. I mean, you got a little.
I don't have a script.
You got a little political, and you know,
just go with it.
You veered off a little bit, but for the most part, it's pretty good. I don't know if he's the missing link. He's just an example of some cooperation between General Baptists and Particular Baptists, and interesting that he falls between Keach and Gill, and yeah, I think Benjamin Stinton's worth spending a little time discussing.
You know, we've been sitting here so long that this hot coffee has become cold, just the way that I like it.
Yeah, I know you were saving it for the show so that you could demonstrate that you were drinking black coffee, but now it's gotten so cold.
Hey, I drank that whole cup. It was disgusting too. Anyway,
and there wasn't even anyone there to prove a point to,
Well, I want our audience to know that I do drink it occasionally to prove to myself that I can.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Benjamin Stinton. So Benjamin Stinton, as Jesse's already mentioned, is kind of a forgotten pastor of a very rich historic church that's still with us today, the Metropolitan Tabernacle, as it's known now. But he was the son-in-law of Benjamin Keach, and he was the predecessor to John Gill. And of course, later, men like John Rippon and C.H. Spurgeon will pastor the church that met at Horsley Down. What animal was it named for?
Oh, I don't know. What was the name for?
The goat yard.
The goat yard. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they came along.
It kind of felt like a trick question. I was like, Horsley Down. Is this a trick question?
No, they've come a long ways from goat yard to Metropolitan Tabernacle. So much better lingo. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Benjamin Stinton? When did he live? Kind of what's the context in which he's ministering in?
Yeah, so Stinton's dates are 1677 to 1719. And as we both already mentioned, he is the pastor at Horsley Down in between Keach and Gill. He is apparently a teacher within the congregation during Keach's own ministry. And according to some reports, Keach basically encouraged him to take the pastorate after he died. As you mentioned, he married one of Benjamin Keach's daughters, and so he was Keach's son-in-law. It is kind of a transitional period in English descent. If you think about going from the end of the 17th century and what we know about the Glorious Revolution and everything that changed after 1689, and then going into the beginning of the 18th century, it's just a very significant shift, I think, in the turn of the century there, and Stinton is living during that. People who watch this show are familiar will know that I'm very interested in the Salters Hall controversy. And Stinton actually, I love Jake's face right now. Stinton actually died.
Visions is what Jesse.
He died like just before the Salters Hall controversy, and the fascinating thing is he had links kind of on both sides of people in the controversy, of subscribers and of non-subscribers. It's hard to figure out in my mind where to put Stinton kind of in all of this, because you think about someone like Benjamin Keach, and you think about the Second London Baptist Confession of Faith, and then you think about whatever you think about John Gill, and here's this guy that stands right in between the two of them. And again, like you mentioned earlier, often overlooked because of the significance and the attention that Keach and Gill have gotten, and Stinton is often not remembered. So his ministry is short-lived because he dies in his 40s. So that cuts much of his ministry kind of short. So he doesn't have the longevity that you would have seen in Keach or in Gill, for that matter. Trying to think of anything else to add there. I don't know. What else do you have?
Well, I think some people would speculate that he's actually named for Keach.
Yeah, so that's one of the things.
His family, the Stintons, were there at church for a long time as members.
Yeah, that's one of the things that W.T. Whitley speculates, is that since his family had been there for a significant period of time, maybe the Benjamin came from Benjamin Keach. Yeah, so maybe
which is just very interesting to think about, especially since he is Keach's successor.
Yeah, his father had apparently been very involved in the congregation. So yeah, seems like a possibility. And I think, again, W.T. Whitley speculates that might have been the case.
So one of the things that's interesting is our introduction to Benjamin Stinton in history is that his name is not known until 1697, when, as Jesse's already mentioned, he's listed as a teacher. And this is in connection with the Articles of Faith that are written for the Horsley Down congregation. Now, one of the kind of the most, I don't know how to put this, interesting twists and turns in the history of, let's say, particular Baptist life in Britain is that, I mean, C.H. Spurgeon would be considered the most famous, well-known, influential particular Baptist that's ever come out of Britain. And I mean, let's just say Calvinistic Baptists in the world, Spurgeon is the one man of that group that everybody knows. This church, though, and when Spurgeon is pastor, he reprints the Second London Confession of Faith. What's interesting is that even in Keach's lifetime, so we're less than 10 years from the General Assembly that owns the confession, Keach leads the church to write a new confession to reflect some of the nuanced, mainly it's the hymn singing stuff that kind of is at the heart of the revision. And then when Gill becomes pastor in the 1720s, he will lead the church to write new articles as well to kind of defend eternal justification away. So what we're trying to say is, look, I like neatness. I like categories, labels. I want this to be simple and easy. But history really is messy. And Baptist history, really during this whole period, is messier than I think sometimes we might want to admit, because we kind of have this image of the simplistic version of events, whereas in reality, it's a lot more difficult to pinpoint and to classify and categorize people. Like Benjamin Stinton. I mean, there's a sense in which you could argue he's a champion for Catholicity, or you might be persuaded that he watered things down. And he's not commendable, someone that we should not emulate. So it kind of depends on your point of view. Am I not right, Jesse?
You kind of sound like a relativist. I don't know. I think your point on the confession thing is fascinating. So the General Baptist, and you get of like 1644. Obviously, there are revisions of that, within the decade of that for different reasons, and things are
Kept
added.
trying to answer all the Paedo Baptists, their
Yeah,
objections.
I mean, so part of it is contextual. So if you think about the Keach thing, the hymn singing issue, Gill is a different thing. There's something of this even in Benjamin Stinton, right? So when it comes to, I think it's the Particular Baptist Fund, he's not really convinced that the Second London should be the absolute basis for the Particular Baptist Fund, and he wants to include General Baptists and Particular Baptists. Now he ultimately loses on pushing for that. He gives, I think, 6 reasons for why it should go beyond Particular Baptists. But I found it fascinating if you think about Keach, Stinton, and Gill. So Keach alters the confession some. Stinton seems maybe he's fine with it, but he doesn't think it should be the basis for the Particular Baptist Fund. And then Gill again offers his own revision of it. It's just things are complicated. It's not like you don't just have this clear line of kind of succession the whole way through. I shouldn't have said succession about Baptists in front of Jake. That's going to get him thinking about a whole host of other things. But it does demonstrate the complexity, and that's one of the things I love the most about Benjamin Stinton is there is this overlap and interaction. There's a sharing of baptistries. He wants to include General Baptist in the Particular Baptist Fund. There are all sorts of relationships that he has that kind of go beyond maybe how we might understand Baptist as being more segmented, as kind of strictly Particular Baptist and strictly General Baptist, as if they never interact with one another. Benjamin Stinton defies that. W.T. Whitley, again, has this really interesting article from a century ago called Benjamin Stinton's Baptist Friends, I think is the title of it. And he kind of details these interactions. It's worth reading. But even at Stinton's death and his funeral, it's like Stinton's funeral is preached by a Particular Baptist minister in an independent Baptist church, and an independent Baptist in an independent church, and then he's buried in a General Baptist burial ground. It's just kind of like things are not as neat and tidy and simple as we'd like them to be, and I think Stinton serves as a really good example of this.
That's like Jesse said, it's complicated. That's what it is when I tell people that Jesse's my favorite Reformed Baptist. It's complicated, though, in how he's a Reformed Baptist.
It's complicated.
So let's think about, we've talked about the Particular Baptist Fund, which is an interesting, some might say it's a forerunner of the cooperative program in the SBC. It was this, gathering of money to help churches. And what's fascinating is that fund still exists today. So if I'm not mistaken, I guess we could say it is the longest, the oldest Baptist organization that's still in existence. I mean, apart from the church, obviously. I mean,
yeah. I can't.
You're supposed to laugh at that, by the way, Jesse.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was thinking too.
He's got so caught up in all his Catholicity over there, he forgets.
No, I was thinking too seriously about the claim you were making.
But I mean, as far as a Baptist organization,
like an ongoing institution.
Yeah.
I would think that could be the case. I mean, maybe there's someone out there that's like, oh no, these churches came from, but yeah, other than maybe something like specific.
Let's just say parachurch
Yeah.
organization. I don't know of anything older that's still in existence.
I can't think of anything.
And I mean, the Baptist, for example, this particular Baptist fund would help pay for books for John Gill in the 1710s and 20s. And it also was part of how William Carey got paid his salary when he pastored in England, because the church was so small. And so the Particular Baptist Fund helped, compensate and make up for any deficiencies. But what we're seeing is Stinton wanted to kind of open it up to those outside of the Particular Baptist world. So let's kind of focus now for a little bit of time about the role that Stinton has there in London with the Hanover Coffee House. And that this is really, Jesse and I were talking about this before we started recording, is that the coffee house became like this de facto Baptist association slash presbytery almost, involving particular and general Baptists. So kind of explain that a little bit to us, Jesse, of how this worked and Stinton's role in this.
Well, for this, we both kind of read several different things. But in Jonathan Arnold, he has a chapter on Benjamin Stinton in Volume 4 of the British Particular Baptists. And he notes in there at the end of the 17th century that figures like Benjamin Keach, Hercules Collins, Joseph Stinton, Richard Adams met at James Jones Coffee House in London. And then the Hanover Coffee House met at Finch Lane. And so, yeah, you have these meetings of Baptist ministers, and some of them included General Baptist. It wasn't just Particular Baptist. I think Abraham Mulliner, who was a General Baptist, who was a subscriber at the Salters Hall controversy, was involved in the Hanover Coffee House meetings. And yeah, I mean, from everything I've read, it seems as if they were talking through issues and sometimes making decisions about how they thought certain things would go. And I mean, you kind of get the sense that this was a very influential thing, at least in London, maybe not among Baptist general or particular in other parts of England, but at least in this area, that it was a very significant group where decisions were made, issues were discussed, and it had some significant weight and pull.
So let's think about this for a minute. I mean, I think it's interesting to see that they understood the importance of collaborating with one another in their lives and ministries. But I think it's also one of the interesting things about how this functions is that, the Particular Baptist in London really, the hymn singing controversy, when Keach and all of that really brought an end to the formal organization. And so they're really trying in the early 1700s to have something that almost is in place of, but it's not exactly an association, doesn't go by that name or that title. But they see the need for working together and ministering. It's also important to see that a lot of times, whatever happened in Baptist history in London kind of people will think that's just how it was for all Baptists everywhere on the island. And that's not the case.
Yeah, I think that's an important point is, when we're thinking historically, the regional nature of life and of issues. So, as Americans, maybe this eludes us when we think about English Baptists. And obviously we're dealing with things that are 3 centuries ago, at least within the context of what we're talking about now. But yeah, I mean, what's happening among Baptists in the city of London is not necessarily representative of what's happening among Baptists throughout England, right? It could be drastically different. It's not hard to imagine that what's happening in Nashville and the controversies and the discussions that are being had are different, right, than what's happening in rural Mississippi or rural Alabama or Eastern Kentucky or West Virginia. That's not hard for us to imagine. I think the same thing is true of Baptists in the 17th and 18th century. So, there might have been greater separation and maybe less interaction in other regions and even among individual figures. But London is not necessarily representative of the whole of what we find in Baptist life, even in this particular period of time.
And then, I just always love finding the connections that begin to form between Baptist in England and Baptist in America. So if we go back to the 1640s and 50s, Baptists are communicating with Roger Williams. Roger Williams makes trips over to England. Roger Williams does. John Clark will go over to England as well in the 1650s and 60s. And so relationships are building there. And then the Hanover Coffee House, that group of ministers also begins to develop a relationship with the Baptist in Pennsylvania. And that's really due to the connection with Elias Keach, who would have been Stinton's brother-in-law. So you're beginning to see, those formal ties and ways between the two groups.
Yeah, you see this even among the general association of General Baptists, which split off of the General Assembly of General Baptists in the 1690s. There's interaction in the late 1690s with Baptists in places like Rhode Island and in Pennsylvania and in Virginia, in some other places along the eastern seaboard. So sure, there's a lot of interaction and overlap between the groups on both sides of the Atlantic.
And then the last thing for us to mention about Stinton today is he is one of the early individuals trying to do Baptist history.
Yeah, and that's really important.
Yeah, and really trying to start collecting documents and data to be able to tell the story. And he will pass away, and kind of his work gets left to then Thomas Crosby.
Yeah, so Whitley talks a little bit about this, and there's some other accounts, and it kind of sounds like I think it's Joseph Stinnett who had maybe initially started this, right. And then it's like, yeah, he collected all these documents, he hoped to do something with it, he got kind of distracted, it never really happened. And then it's like Benjamin Stinton then was going to take these documents, maybe he inherits some of them, maybe he brings some of them together himself into what's often referred to as Stinton's repository. And it's like, he's going to do something with them, but he dies relatively young. He doesn't seem to do much with them other than maybe write an introduction or a preface, which comes into Crosby's multi-volume Baptist history. And so Crosby tries to make use of what Stinton had in this repository, but Crosby kind of says, I'm sure I wouldn't do as good of a job with this as Stinton might have, but Crosby's the one who actually turns it into a multi-volume Baptist history, which is interesting in and of itself. But it is the earliest of these, and then Ivamy draws on Crosby, and then you have something like Adam Taylor has a history of Baptist that focuses a little bit more in the General Baptist. But Crosby's work, based off of Stinton's repository, is kind of the earliest full Baptist history that we have.
All right. Well, my computer's about to die, and so this will be the record of our shortest, generally particular episode. It's a bite-sized one.
Yeah, I'll just add real quickly before your computer dies, hopefully. Stinton was apparently known, and Jonathan Arnold points this out, for his generosity, not only for ministers in need, but for people who had fallen on financial hardship. That seems to be a really recurring theme in his life and in his ministry. There's also some cooperation with a repairs of a shared baptistry between his congregation and another group of General Baptists, the Barbican congregation. So all sorts of fascinating things worth looking into with Benjamin Stinton.
I just think the Barbican, that name, it sounds like barbecue and barbarians. And when I'm just thinking about, I would almost have objected to sharing baptistry with a bunch of Arminian Baptists. They could corrupt the water. I mean, who knows what germs we would have received.
This is an element we haven't thought about, right? You have like the orthodoxy of the congregation, the faith of the minister, the faith of the person being baptized, and then now who used the water before you. We hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. All right, well, friends, we hope you profit from this short but still packing a punch episode of Generally Particular. And as we always say, stay Baptist, our friends.
Stay Baptist.